everyone, to another episode of whatever this is going to be called, the Babylon Cast, or all things considered. I'm not too sure. The algorithm's actually killing us because I guess a video game came out called the Babylon Project, and so now whenever you search into YouTube, the Babylon Project, we used to be at the top of the search. Now it's a video game, and I tried scrolling down and trying to find us and we were basically blown out of the water by this game. So that's going to cause some interesting branding issues. We'll see what has to happen there. But whereas those sorts of changes might be occurring, many things will be staying the same. For example, my good friend Bruce is still here. My partner Bruce, how are you doing today?
I'm incredibly busy with a lot of other projects going along on the side, some of which I can't even talk about, involving some of the work we do. But things are going well overall. Just a lot going on.
hmm And I really have to say from the bottom of my heart, incredibly proud of how much of everything that you've been accomplishing. It's insanely impressive, and I hope all goes amazingly well with your projects because it's genuinely fantastic to hear. And it's also great to hear and see you again because we haven't had much time as of late to kind of just talk. There's been so many things going on.
No, we haven't. I think it's been several months since our last podcast. I run a speaking group on the side in which we've had some of our guests come on there, and I've had a chance to meet with several other people that we both know on that same channel. So I've kind of been continuing that work on that on from that angle. Um, but yeah, it's been a while since we've done anything like this, and kind of hoping we get the momentum going again and see what's what there's to talk about because I think it's been about a year or something like that since we last did something like this, and the landscape has really shifted. There's no more IDW. There's no more um, a lot of people we used to discuss who seem to be on the, in my opinion, the right side of history. Well, I hate using that term because who can really tell what the limited information we have at hand. But I think a lot of the people that we had admired have, in my opinion, gone off the deep end, and well, I mean, it's made for a lot of interesting food for thought, and what that means for the immediate future of the intellectual community and the Western democracy is really up in the air.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of questions that need to be answered in terms of what direction civilization is going towards. And as you said, the landscape has changed a lot, and it has, not just in terms of where the country is going, and not just in terms of where society is going, but even with people whom that we have always listened to and liked have taken strange turns. Turns that you and I aren't particularly crazy about. Now, we have to kind of, recognize that people's opinions can change, and it could also be the case that maybe we're wrong. Maybe we're the crazy ones that are kind of stuck in our antiquated ways, whereas everyone has kind of progressed. That could be true, but I don't think it is, and I'd be willing to have a conversation with anyone who thinks otherwise. But there are certainly a lot of people that we used to be fans of that seem to have gone off the deep end, and this kind of leads into the topical conversation for today, and that kind of revolves around this toxic culture that has just continued to exist, right? So a lot of things are changing in the political landscape and the cultural landscape, but the level of toxicity remains the same. And there are so many people out there that, have recognized that having conversations with people that you disagree with should be something that is normalized, and we should try to be as civil as possible. That doesn't mean you should respect the other person. It certainly doesn't mean you should respect the other person's ideas, but at least be willing to have these civil conversations. And the proprietors of that type of thought um, don't seem to actually be living up to its ideals. The classic example is, of course, Dave Rubin. Dave Rubin was someone who said that we need to be able to have conversations with people that disagree with us, and he obviously doesn't do that. He is incredibly vitriolic towards other people. He's incredibly vitriolic to people who even slightly disagree with him. And you'll never see someone like David Pakman on Dave Rubin's show. You'll never see someone like Sam Harris ever again on Dave Rubin, because Dave Rubin, in his eyes, Sam Harris is the one that went off the deep end. He's crazy and he shouldn't be spoken with. And so the reason I actually wanted to bring this topic up with you is because I had long thought that this a level of toxicity within these conversations that we have was generally only within the realm of politics or within the realm of talking about the culture war. And I had thought that there's something unique about these conversations, and maybe there is. But recently, as a way to kind of de-stress from what's going on in the world, I've tried to become more invested within the realms of like movies, TV shows. So I created a Twitter account only to kind of follow people that are within like the movie industry or even within the video game industry. And what I've noticed is that these communities are just as toxic as the political communities that we follow. People are hating themselves and mudslinging and calling each other horrible names over different opinions about movies, different opinions about video games. Uh, and this is the last thing that we really need to be hating each other about are just entertainment things like this. And so I was thinking about how this notion of being able to have conversations with people that disagree with us, uh, it's so much more pervasive than we think. And this makes me believe that this problem of talking to other people is a much bigger problem. It sounds cliche, right? Yeah, just talk to people that you disagree with. It sounds very cliche, but I think the problem is so much worse than a lot of people actually realize. I think that a lot, especially when you see, the people who claim to be champions of free speech, claim to be champions of having civil discourse with people that they disagree with, they fall prey to this themselves. And so I think this is because of that. This is a much bigger problem than we think. And I'd like to get your thoughts. I mean, you've been kind of delving into probably the most toxic of all topics imaginable. So I kind of would like your take about just the level of toxicity that you've encountered and whether or not you think the problem is getting worse or whether or not it's getting better.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to put things, and like I think that like what you brought up Dave Rubin. Dave is okay. So I used to be a fan of his show when he seemed to be more reasonable, but like I should have seen this a lot earlier when he started having, I don't want to call them debates, some more challenging conversations with people on his show way back when it first came out, like one like Steven Crowder. Dave Rubin did that. Those interviews were revelatory because it showed that he doesn't have the intellectual capacity to handle a conversation like that. He could not push back on any of Steven Crowder's points. He could not have an intelligent conversation with him. There's no point in having. Well, okay, let me back up a bit. There's reduced value in having a conversation with someone who you're not prepared to interact with. What counterpoints are you going to bring to play? How are you going to challenge someone else's ideas in a constructive fashion? You can't. You don't have the capacity to do so. Um, Now, taking a step back from that, two people who one of which who I've somewhat been a fan of, but I am growing to admire more and more is Alex O'Connor, Cosmic Skeptic. You also have someone like Destiny, who I did not know too much about until recently, and he's becoming much more and more prominent on the public stage. Um, Alex has had people on his show who are big names. I think most recent one was Jordan Peterson, who, although I admire him, I've become marginally less a fan of his over time. And Alex seems to be the quintessential example of someone who's able to have those kinds of conversations because one of the things I've never liked about Jordan is that he always tap dances around the idea of whether he believes in God or not. You ask him that, and he'll answer with some kind of question saying that this will take me like 10,000 hours to to explain, or he'll go into some kind of word salad in which he says we come from the metaphorical substrate of the universe or whatever, which I think is just incredibly. I think it's beneath him, and it really does make him look like he's dancing around the issue, which I really think he is. With all due respect to the man, as he does good work in several areas, but in that area, I think that I really don't think much of him. But you have Alex, who's I haven't seen the podcast for myself, but all the commentary I've read on it so far, and from what I've seen of him, he's able to tease out these talking points from people in a way that's not hostile, and he's able to really have what I call a decent conversation with somebody in which he's able to break down what someone believes from point A to point B, and it sounds like from all the commentary he was able to do that with Jordan to some respect, and I think that that's someone that's a podcast I really definitely have to listen to because it sounds like he demonstrates the capacity to have those conversations. One, he's articulate. Number two, he's incredibly intelligent and incisive, so he can ask the right questions in order to break everything down and make it digestible to his audience. Those are great qualities to have. He's also not argumentative. Someone else now going back to the other individual I was talking about, Destiny, sharp mind. Also, he seems to have be less agreeable than other people than other folks. He's like I don't want to say he's combative, but he knows how to come back into someone in a debate. Doesn't seem to be afraid of offending anybody. Seems to be fairly intellectually rigorous. I need to look more into his work, so catch me if I'm talking out of my ass here. But he's another individual who can actually toss something back at someone, so you can have a good back and forth. To number one, challenge someone else's views, and to dive into the nuances by a mutual exploration of whatever topic you're speaking of. However, what I will say about him though is that he does seem to have that combativeness of him. Again, I don't know, I haven't seen too much of his work. That just seems that's an immediate difference I see between him and Alex. He looks like he had a conversation with Jordan that didn't go so well. So if I was to contrast the two, if we want to have a decent conversation between two sides and champion the idea that we should be able to constructively share our ideas and get something out of them, and maybe even get the public to follow people along, you have to have the capacities of someone like Alex O'Connor. You need to have the demeanor, the emotional makeup, the ability to speak articulately, and obviously the time to look into a subject. The reality is most of us do not have that capacity. I don't think you can find someone who could define the term critical thinking, and that's a term that gets thrown around a lot. So the cliche, let's have a conversation. Yes, let's have a conversation, but like I have to question, like, do you have the capacity to make that conversation productive? And do you understand what critical thinking is? And are you capable of having that emotionally and intelligently? And I would say most of us do not.
Yeah, and I wholeheartedly agree. I'm very glad that you brought up those two individuals, Alex O'Connor and Destiny, because those are two people who have very different styles of communicating and debating. As you said, Destiny is much more firebrand. He's a lot more combative, but he's also someone who he tries to be charitable and he tries to be civil. Um, Now, just being civil and being charitable doesn't mean that you have to act like Alex O'Connor. Alex O'Connor, I think, is probably the more polite version of someone like Destiny, right? Where, yeah, he can disagree with people that he's talking with, that he's debating against, but he's polite, he's well tempered, and he doesn't kind of, he tries not to interrupt people when they speak. um, and then on the other end, you have Destiny, who he is civil. He isn't throwing names, or he isn't throwing disparaging remarks against people that he's disagreeing with when he's debating them one on one. But he's a lot quicker. He's a lot more firebrand. He pushes back a lot more. So he's kind of like a politer version of Christopher Hitchens in a way, where Christopher Hitchens was known for being firebrand and he had a incredibly sharp wit. but he wasn't particularly polite to the people that he was debating with in front of them, right? And so I think both of these two people kind of resemble a good way in terms of having conversations with people that they disagree with. And the the Destiny phenomenon, I think, was interesting because Destiny went on to debate people like Ben Shapiro, Candace Owens, Jordan Peterson, Chris Williamson, trigonometry. Actually, I don't know if he went on with Chris Williamson. He might have, but I don't. If he did, I don't remember it.
He was on a
Uh,
show, but I don't think it was a debate. I think it was more of a discussion. I need to go back and look at it, but I doubt it was a debate.
okay, that makes sense. But one of the things that I notice, and this goes back to the original point that I was talking about how a lot of these mostly right-wing commentators who complain about how the left refuses to have civil conversations, engage in discourse, and how they refuse to debate them. I think probably in 2015 that was true. It's not true now. It certainly isn't. And I know a lot of the usual candidate is Sam Cedar. You know, why doesn't Stephen Crowder debate Sam Cedar? And the response generally is, well, because Sam Cedar is a bit of a prick. But you guys are too, right? Stephen Crowder's a bit of a prick as well. So is Candace Owens. Like everyone is, right? There's not the only difference is the fact that one has a blue tie and the other one has a red tie. But this was the first time, and so they wouldn't debate him, right? Stephen Crowder debates college students because it's low-hanging fruit and he looks good. But people like Candace Owens and Stephen Crowder have never actually had their ideas challenged in a face-to-face context against someone who actually knows their metal. Charlie Kirk debates college students and uploads those clips onto his YouTube channel because it makes him look good. Because college students aren't particularly well equipped to have these discussions. They're generally very idealistic. They're very young. They don't know much about a particular topic, and they're also very biased and, for lack of a better term, emotional. And so, of course, if you debate a college student, you're going to look good because it's easy. It's low-hanging fruit. But what happens when you have an actual, left-leaning person or an actual leftist who knows their stuff and who is civil debate against someone like Candace Owens and or against, the trigonometry guys? Well, they go crazy, right? You get Joe Rogan saying making fun of Destiny for not knowing what he's talking about, even though Joe Rogan is the prime candidate when someone thinks about someone who talks about things that they don't know anything about. I think that's what happened. Why was it that Candace Owens reacted so negatively to her debate against Destiny? I don't think it was specifically because Destiny was a prick. I think it's because this was the first time that she actually had to be challenged and she was scared about looking bad, and so she just resorted to these horrible tactics. And that's why I'm glad that Destiny exists, whether you agree with him or disagree with him, whether you like it or not. He's a force to be reckoned with in the debating scene, and he's not your dumb leftist college student. He's smart, and he does a lot of research, whether you like it or not. A lot of people like to criticize him for looking up stuff on Wikipedia. That's more research than 95% of the political commentators on YouTube.
That's a lot more realistic than what Joe Rogan does. And now I was a fan of Rogan's podcast. I've steadily become less of a fan of his over time because although okay, yeah, and again, that criticism that Destiny gave of him is probably the most charitable that I think that anyone can give. Well, you can credit Rogan for bringing a lot of information to the public's eye over the last couple of years, but he's also done a lot of dumb stuff. And the criticism that Destiny has for him is like he's open-minded, yes. It's a lot of interesting people to come onto his show and a lot of good people to come onto his show. But he's also invited a lot of people who are quacks, Alex Jones among them. And like the criticism I have for Joe is he's open-minded, but he's so open-minded that his brains fall out.
Mhm.
Now going back to the subject of having conversations, Destiny is someone who I don't always want the people speaking out to be polite. I don't want them to be polite. Sometimes I think that combative attitude is necessary, despite. Okay, so why do I think that's necessary? Is because you can't always be polite. You have to be able to challenge someone's ideas, especially when you're talking about someone who's not debating in good faith or just going for low-hanging fruit. Like the perfect punching bag in this regard to someone who I really dislike is Candace Owens because I think what she does is just throw out a lot of talking points that are based that have some amount of truth to that have some amount of tangential truth to them. But she doesn't really dive into the some of the nuances and complexity, and she takes whatever outrage, whatever kind of publicity she gets, and uses it to generate clicks, to generate likes, to get people to pile on. In that case, why would you want to have someone like Alex O'Connor, with all due respect to Alex, why would you want to have someone like him speak to her? She's not going to answer in good faith. She's not going to have a conversation that's based in fact finding. She's going to do something that to reinforce her narrative and to spread toxicity in the intellectual space. In that case, you need someone like Destiny. You need someone like Christopher Hitchens to dismantle them. Unfortunately, that's exactly what you have to do. Get up there, make them look like an ass, and make it very, very clear they don't know what the hell they're talking about. That's a that this might not be a popular thing to say, but that is a conversation in and of itself. But you're having a conversation with someone who doesn't have any sense of ethics. So when that occurs, and when they have such a huge following, they have to be taken out intellectually. And that's where people like Destiny comes into play, and he excels in that area. Um, the One of the examples I'll give is like that debate he had with Jordan Peterson, and he I think he put Jordan on the spot in that one. There was a dialogue in which Destiny made the comment that at some point you have to rely on experts, and Jordan just said, "No, you don't. No, you don't." I'm like, "Yes, you do. Yes, you do. That's just not debatable. No one is a subject in every single subject area." And Jordan, for all the good he's done, he is, in my opinion, one of the most overrated intellectuals of this era. Like, who I think he caught on because he's great in his bailiwick. He gives a lot of good self help information to people online, and he is, I believe, at heart a good person with good intentions. That being said, a lot of the conversations he's had, he's represented several other people's work. Like one of the, in that case, Steven Pinker's at the Enlightenment Now. His thesis that the world has gotten better over time. I think Jordan has propagated that to the public, propagated Steven Pinker's work to the public as well as others. And Steven Pinker, as much as I love his work, is not half the public speaker that Jordan Peterson is. But when it comes to speaking about certain subjects, like his word salad when it comes to religion, that whole spiel um, uh, uh, about experts, that was ridiculous. With all due respect, that was ridiculous, and you needed someone like Destiny to really show that up on screen. Now, I would prefer it would not have gone that way because Jordan seems to have he still seems to have some kind of some character, and I applaud him for that. And you probably could have gotten away with having a conversation with someone like Alex O'Connor, but that being what it is, Destiny went up there and just did his thing, and I thought exposed flaws in Jordan's thought process.
Yeah, and I think another good one was when Alex O'Connor debated the trigonometry guys, where towards the end of that podcast, when uh, what's his name, Constantine, I think his name is,
Once again, kissing, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, they were talking about the social utility of religion and to, why we need religion, whether or not wokeism could be considered a religion. And Alex O'Connor was asking very, I don't want to say basic, but just kind of rudimentary philosophical kind of questions about, well, to what extent is this thing a religion, right? If we're talking about the level of severity of a particular issue that some people are concerned about, and then they react in the same way that these leftists are reacting, and are they therefore acting religious, right? So if someone is concerned about artificial intelligence to the same degree that the Extinction Rebellion is concerned about climate change, and they start to exhibit the same tendencies, are they religious? And Constantine's answer, or whatever his name is, by the way, and I do know a lot about him because for some reason I just don't know I can never pronounce his last name, but I actually did like their podcast a lot back in the day. But his response was effectively, yeah, but they're being rational and the other people are not because what they're saying is true and the other people aren't being true. And he couldn't really understand what Alex's main point was. And his main point was more philosophical and it was more about defining our terms. And because Francis didn't he hasn't really actually encountered any pushback from people that disagree with him. The pushback that he sees is probably on Twitter from crazy leftist people that are not actually
Yeah,
representative of,
yeah.
the left, that was his interpretation of it. And so you can see people crumble. You can see the floor crumble beneath someone's feet when they actually encounter someone that they disagree with. And it was so bad to the point where even on Trigonometry's channel, their comment section is mostly filled with people who are sympathetic to Alex and seeing how, Francis's how the cultural war can really fry someone's brain. And that's why I'm glad that they're here. Um, but to bring up a point that you were talking about earlier, in terms of having, these conversations and how it's you shouldn't always expect someone to be civil. You need people to actually be a lot more kind of, combative in the Christopher Hitchens kind of style. You know, and this is my question to you, do you feel like that type of rhetoric and debating style kind of makes the political landscape culture worse because they'll see their favorite political commentators just go after, Candace Owens, calling her an idiot and stuff like that. Or not just calling her an idiot, but just being a lot more, firebrandy. And then it kind of just makes everyone, it raises the temperature of everyone. So now everyone's also like, okay, so like it's okay to kind of talk about this sort of stuff in this way and debate in this way and treat other people in this way. Do you think that could probably also kind of contribute to this level of toxicity that we see in politics?
Okay, so I don't know the exact answer to that, but one thing I will say is this: I suspect. Okay, I'll back up a little bit. There are a lot of people who watch these shows, right? A lot of these debates, a lot of these conversations behind people. Based on the conversations that you and I have had over the last couple of years, how many people do you think actually understand philosophy, understand what epistemology is, understand what critical thinking is, understand what is it, the Occam's razor? How many of them actually understand Enlightenment thought, the scientific method? I would argue that very, very, very few people do. So they come online, they watch the shows, they watch the debates, and they watch it, in my not so humble opinion, with the same kind of attitude that people come in to watch the UFC with. They want to see the Conor McGregors of the world come on and just talk trash, get some kind of entertainment value out of it, and then go rah 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 for the team, and then just make excuses for them when they perform poorly. Now, in contrast, for the people who are truly intellectual, and I would argue that you're one of those people, my friend. Remember, like, I remember that conversation that Alex had with Douglas Murray several years ago. Okay, so there it was a good faith conversation, and for a moment there, there was a moment where Alex put Douglas on his back foot. He was not able to answer some of his questions with the same kind of confidence that I usually see coming out of him, and nothing bad came out of it, but it did show a little bit of staggering on Douglas's part, and you pointed that out. Now, some would go, yeah, let's take look how he rocked Douglas back. But the more thoughtful would have thought, like, hey, no, this is an interesting point here that Douglas doesn't necessarily have an answer to. So let's dig in a little bit right here um, to see to get at whatever truth for whatever claim that we're exploring. But again, most of us do not have that capacity. And until we do, I think a level of this combativeness is necessary to show how show the level of intellectual integrity or the level of intellectual vapidness that an individual has, and let the public decide for itself, and let the more reasonable people see that, and let the cards fall where they may on someone who's toxic. What else are you going to do? And until we get to a point where more people understand the thought processes that came out of the Enlightenment, more importantly, learn how to develop the character and understanding you need to have a conversation of this sort, you're going to be in the same boat. You're not going to have a purely a purely civil atmosphere. I mean, even the initial Enlightenment philosophers didn't have this. So it's a mixed bag.
So I suppose to understand your point as well as I possibly can, is it that this level of insightfulness that someone like Alex O'Connor provides, obviously most people can't, most political commentators can't provide that level of
No, they
insightfulness.
can't.
And
No. Yeah.
and so in which case for like those people, a good way to expose how ridiculous some people can be is to use ridicule, is to use humor. That is an alternative weapon that someone can use when they don't have the the thoughtful skills that someone like Alex O'Connor has. They can use these weapons instead, and it'll achieve the same goal.
Well, all right. That I need to back up on. That I'm not too sure about. Um, okay, so I'll just say it like it's coming through my head. That kind of mockery, I think, has its place, but you have to be very, very careful about how you apply it because humans are still pack animals. We still fall behind people, behind authority figures we emulate their behavior. And I can see people just getting behind the mockery bandwagon simply because one of their favorites wants to sort of shit parade on someone that they dislike whose views are they find out porn online, which doesn't really contribute to the conversation. I'll um I'll double back on my favorite intellectual. I don't always agree with them, but like about 90% of the things he speaks on, I agree with, and I like a lot of what he has to say. Sam Harris. He's had a lot of people shit on him. A lot of people just shit on him over the last couple of years, and they do so through mockery. They come at him from my not so humble opinion in very very bad in very very bad faith, and a lot of the critiques I hear about him, like, oh, he's arrogant or whatever. I don't know where the hell they get that from. Um, Whenever I listen to Sam's podcast, he rarely, if ever, responds in kind of mockery. He might take a slight jab at somebody every now and then, but he's never come off as someone who actually goes out there to try to make his intellectual enemies look bad. And that's someone who I would care to emulate to an extent because that, to probably the best extent possible, keeps the intellectual space pure of the worst parts of human nature. Now, having said that, I do believe mockery has its place. Why would I entertain someone like Alex Jones? I think that guy should be laughed out of existence. I don't think people like Joe Rogan should have him on have him on the podcast. Um, and the last conversation that Joe had with I think Terrence Howard, and which he was talking,
Oh my gosh.
he was saying all this weird woo woo stuff. It has all these scientists just going on and criticizing Joe and his guest. I think that was a classic example of Joe Rogan having his mind so open that his brains fall out. With all due respect, again, I am a fan. I am generally a fan of his podcast. And I like Joe in general, but unfortunately, that's a criticism I'm going to have to agree with.
Hmm.
And going back to Sam, that's someone whose approach I would like to emulate. So, does that behavior pollute the space? Yes, it does, but I also believe it has its place, but it should be used sparingly. To what extent, I don't have the answer. I don't have an answer for you. But
Hmm.
you need some combination of the Sam Harris's, Alex O'Connors, and Destinies in the world to have a solid intellectual space. And you need less
Yeah.
people like Candace Owens. You need more people like those three. And on the right, someone I respect but don't agree with him on several areas is Ben Shapiro. He seems to have some, he seems to have some integrity. Well, that's not being generous enough. No, my apologies. I believe Ben has integrity, and uh, we might not agree, but he seems to be willing to debate and speak in good faith as long as his interlocutor is willing to do so. So you need individuals like that from the left, from the right. You need less Sam Cedars, you need less Dave Rubins, you need less Candace Owens. You need people of the capacity to have a true intellectual space.
Mhm.
If you don't have that, then I'm sorry, but you're pretty much watching a version of reality TV,
Mhm.
listening to so-called smart people talk. That's what it all boils down to.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with I think I agree with everything that you said. Um, I don't think mockery should be completely thrown away. I think just the dial should be turned down a little bit, especially on certain individuals. Because you're right, there are some ideas that we should treat with mockery, right? What do we do with Robert Kennedy's views on vaccinations? They should be laughed at. They should be mocked. And to the extent that we have a civil, like, here's the thing, and I don't know if this will be a conversation. I don't know if this will be controversial, but not no one is owed a civil conversation about anything. No one is owed anything. I think that we should have civil conversations because I think it greatly benefits society. But we also need to recognize that there are some ideas out there that we've kind of moved past on. And a lot of those ideas are incredibly dangerous, right? So RFK's views on vaccinations are incredibly dangerous. We've moved past that. We've moved past that. Now, that doesn't mean that he's not allowed to have these conversations, and that doesn't mean that he has to keep quiet. It doesn't mean that he can't find someone or start a podcast on his own to talk about these sorts of things. But it certainly means that, that he has his work cut out ahead of him. If your ideas are that discredited, you really need to you really need to provide an amazing argument, right? It's kind of the same thing in peer review research, right? So for example, in physics there was this notion of the ether, right? It was this medium, this kind of gelatinous thing that existed in space. And for a long time people believed it. People believed in the ether. And but it was discredited, and now no one believes in the ether. No self-respecting physicist believes that the ether exists. Now that doesn't mean that you're not allowed to publish a paper demonstrating that the ether does exist or it can exist. All it means is that because most people don't believe it exists and there's a lot of evidence against the idea that it does exist, you when you do write a paper about it, you're expected to write a pretty damn good paper with amazing evidence, with amazing arguments until it can actually start becoming a much bigger conversation. But that's not what's like. So I think that's kind of the way it should also work in society. Someone like Joe Rogan, don't just have on this actor who thinks that one times one actually equals two, and then call him a genius at the end of it, offer no pushback to it. There's this level of kind of rigorous research that isn't really being had for a lot of these things, right? A lot of that, like Tucker Carlson arguing against evolution, these things are insane. And I remember you worded it really well when what was it that you said? I think you were quoting Anna Kasparian, who obviously we're not huge fans of, but what was it? Something like Joe Rogan, just kind of, he's like a little baby who like is very impressionable.
I don't remember saying anything like that, but I just go back to my old saying. I think he's open-minded, but he's so open-minded his brains fall out. He doesn't have the kind of backing he needs to be able to reinforce his points.
Hmm.
I mean, Joe will push back on you. You've seen him do that on several shows, but the thing is, he's not qualified to push back in a variety of different areas. I mean, he's got a thing for conspiracy theories. I mean, like, yeah, that's who he is.
Hmm.
Um, Now, I think I kind of disagree how like about the nature of some of these conversations. Like, why how Nolan is owed a platform. Now, and we might be talking past each other here, but the reality is most of us are not trained are not trained in the scientific method. Like again, like going back to what I was saying before, no one knows no one can define critical thinking or any of the ideas that demand intellectual humility. Occam's razor. You know this much, but we can't extrapolate further than this point. Um, are you proportioning your beliefs to evidence, or are you overstating them? do you know when you're making a presupposition and not relying on inductive reasoning to get to a reasonable level of belief for whatever idea you have in your mind? No one, most people are not familiar with these things, and you see an amazing amount of woo out there, like like example, like Gwyneth Paltrow believing in like goop or whatever. You got Oprah Winfrey, who I think Joe Rogan is becoming something of, has be, is something of a reflection of. She has some funny beliefs herself, and when you're not familiar with all the subject matter, we come back to the idea of having to rely on experts. But why how many people realize just how dependent they are on that stuff, and how many of us are a part of this are really into the ideas of epistemology and and realizing like we want to be empiricists, we want to pursue truth. Most of us, I guess, do not do so. So I would say conversations like this are necessary because the ideas are always out there, and we're tribal creatures. We have not evolved, whether in our genetics or mimetics, to be a more rational species yet. And those conversations are necessary. And Joe, in his defense, has brought many voices of reason on his show. Unfortunately, he's also brought a lot of nonsense on there. So until we can come to a more perfect space, we do need this dialogue to occur, and until we find out a way to really say that certain people are quacks and people can understand it, that they are so, that they know how to rely on experts, and if we get to a point where we have our institutions trustworthy again, we can go into a more optimistic space about who gets to be a part of the conversation, who doesn't. But we're not there. That's the bottom line.
Mhm. Yeah, I apologize if I misspoke. I never argue for deplatforming or anything like that. I think you
Oh no
should
no no!
platform anyone.
I wasn't saying that. Sorry, that's not what I meant.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I was just trying to demonstrate like the types of ideas that would generally be
Sure,
considered
sure.
worthy of mockery given where we are in society. And the anti-evolution views, I think, are a part of it. That, well, yeah, have civil conversations with them, but when we're thinking about, well, what types of ideas, generally speaking, are worthy of being mocked, are, don't, you shouldn't have the expectation of having a civil discourse about, probably something like that. Um, and yeah, and I think in the grand scheme of things, I think the big issue is that when we're looking at the dials that are turned, the dial that is turned for civility and the dial that is turned for mockery, I think the dial for mockery is turned too high and the dial for civility is too low. And you had said recently about how a lot of people are accusing Sam Harris of being arrogant. A lot of the people that are accusing him of being arrogant are people who are arrogant themselves. The only difference is that they don't like it when people are being arrogant against them. And there's this high level of sensitivity among a lot of people who can't take in what they dish out. If you're going to be like someone like Dave Rubin and cry about any little thing that, or kind of make fun of anyone who's on, like, make fun of the people on The View every day, or say like this horrible thing. Okay, you're gonna say something that horrible, and then you're gonna have the gall to call other commentators arrogant or to negatively talk about their character. Like you have to be able to take in what you dish out, and a lot of these people aren't. And this goes back to what I was saying about people like Candace Owens, where for the first time they actually encountered someone who could push back against them in an intellectual capacity, and they didn't like it. And you see that happening, and you see that happening far too often, which really makes it abundantly obvious that a lot of these people who are purveyors of free speech, purveyors of having open and honest conversations with people whom they disagree with, they're full of crap. And, they're wolves in sheep's clothing. But people need to kind of see past that, because until we can see past that, like until we can see that reality and see these people for who they really are, we won't be able to progress as civilization. I don't know how to solve this problem. If literally debating movies and video games, things that are supposed to be an escape from politics, like talk show hosts. I was listening to a podcast actually today about how politicized talk shows have become, right? James Gordon and Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, all these people who are just what's his name, Seth Meyers, who are incredibly political, and they just make fun of Donald Trump 24/7 to the point where it's tacky. I mean, talk shows were supposed to be an escape from politics. The talk shows came on after the news. Conan O'Brien was after the news. David Letterman was after the news, and they didn't talk about like a lot of people like to say, and this is what they mentioned in the podcast, that what people used to say that it was always political. Like, no, it wasn't. It was an escape. And if our escape venues like video games, like movies, TV shows, entertainment, if those venues are filled with the same level of toxicity as conversations about politics are, about the Israel-Palestine issue, then we're fucked. Like, how do we solve that? Because even I feel that, right? Like, if I see someone review a movie that I love, that I cherish, and they hate it, I do feel that, like, kind of, anger boiling inside me. And I know it's stupid because it's just a movie. Who cares? But even if someone like me, who I'd like to think that I can recognize the problem and see it and say, like, hey, this is an issue, if someone like me like feels that deep inside me and feels the sense of wanting to go away from listening to people I disagree with, then how much worse is it going to be for politics? And by the way, that's not me saying that like I'm good. It's like, no, I believe me, I'm not good at having simple conversations either. I'm sure I have so many flaws in this area, but at least I can say that I see the problem, right? At least I see it. But now the people who don't see it, who don't really care for it, like, how do you solve this problem?
We have intellectual conversations in this space, but the answer I have for that is who raised you? That's what I think it all comes down to. And I want to give someone a shout out right now who I think said the best thing to me regarding topics like this. We've had our mutual friend Angelo Eduardo on, and
Mm.
I think we talked about this in the podcast with him, or it might have been in private. And I think I made the comment that I think social media had made me more of an asshole. And I think Angel came back to us in some way or form saying like, did it? Or how did it do that? Or did it just give you an avenue for you to exercise some of your worst impulses?
Well, mhm.
It was in you, somewhere. Um, Social media gives you that avenue to. I um I really got to brush up on my philosophy, but isn't there some kind of story out there about, I think it might be Greek or whatever, when someone gives you a ring like that makes you invisible, that allows
Oh,
you
Lord of the
um
Rings?
not Lord of the Rings. It's a philosophical tale meant to illustrate something. I don't remember what it was, but they're able to wear this ring. You become invisible. You go out there, commit whatever crime you want, steal stuff, hurt people, do whatever. Um, you can take it off and just live your life as is. Did that ring make you into someone terrible, or was that something all that was already there?
Hmm.
It's the same concept. Did you exercise the worst parts of yourself there, and could you do so, and you were able to do so because this gave you a shield for which to do so. And social media in many ways provides that shield. I can jump on an online site, throw up an anonymous account, hop on a few computers with different IP addresses, and just talk smack and just incite fights, do whatever online that I want to do. And how do you solve it? Well, I think that there's something to be said about cultivating virtue here. That's an area of philosophy that I very much do want to explore. I was in the bar the other day, just having a drink and just doing some reading, and like I was trying to go over some material regarding classical liberalism, and I was going over some of the early life of John Stuart Mill. Um, he there was a chapter in which he was having a conversation with his father, who I think I need to look into it again. I think his father was impressing upon him the idea of the point of life is to be able to take in pleasure, um, that which is conducive towards happiness. Or I'm probably way oversimplifying it here, but like John Stuart Mill a had a revelation in his life after a nervous breakdown that made him conclude that self-development, um, that version of utilitarianism, should be the North Star of life. And I think, in regards to the conversation you and I are having about how to improve things, that should be a prescribed North Star for those who want to improve the intellectual space as well as the overall makeup of society. Because with this kind of antagonism and the impulse to be punitive, it doesn't do our civilization any good to walk down this road.
Hmm.
So self-development and the cultivation of virtue, that's what I would say is a step in that direction. But again, we need to have people recognize like why those values are important,
Hmm.
why those approaches are important. Excuse me.
Do you think a big part of this, like, how much damage do you think a website like Twitter is doing for someone's own personal, I guess, virtue cultivation? Because I still have my Twitter or at my X account, and I'm never on it. It's deleted from my phone. I'm literally never on it, and I realized that with Twitter being out of my life, like 99%. I have found myself to be a lot happier. I'm a lot more charitable when I hear people that I disagree with. And I kept thinking about how, wow, we really all should just delete Twitter. But then another part of me was also saying, you know, I I shouldn't have had to have deleted Twitter for me to realize that about myself, that I'm possible, that I'm capable of, you know, of thinking in this way. I shouldn't have to delete Twitter. I shouldn't have to make that change. There's, there should be some virtue that I have to cultivate that I can probably train, right? It's going to be difficult, but I should hopefully be able to get to that level of charitableness towards other people without having to basically just close my eyes from a big public square. I mean, what are your thoughts on that and the effect of something like Twitter?
Well, again, Twitter is that invisible ring, right? It allows you to go up there and snipe at people without consequence. Well, okay, not without consequence if you know how to utilize it. If you can hide behind a username and just spout nonsense. So in that respect, it's a negative space, and it's even more of a negative space if you decide if you have a big profile and you decide to act like a jerk online.
Hmm.
So that is just it's the platform for that it's a major platform which people can get up on and use just to stir shit. And it's addicting because we're all addicted to bad news. Um, it's not there anymore, but I thought that a platform that was great for developing the intellectual space was something like letter.wiki. I
Yeah.
am bummed that that site never took off. We had several people on there who had long form conversations that went on a podcast, but all was in a written format. It gives you the ability to really take the time to explore someone else's ideas, but that never got popular. Big surprise. Those kind of conversations are 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 structured in a way that doesn't reward clickbaitiness, so allow you to throw in like one or two one-liners from that are designed to just stir up your whoever's listening. It demands a level of knowledge, a level of ability to communicate that Twitter that you don't necessarily need to have a discussion on Twitter. Um, Now, Twitter does allow you to chain your thoughts together. One of my favorite people, Sarah Hyder, does a marvelous job of this. She articulates her points very well. She writes these essays on Twitter sometime that I really think people should take the time to read. And do I always agree with her? No, but she's very, very persuasive. And when she says something, it usually forces me to reconsider my viewpoints. But she's very, very articulate. Um, she's not the kind of person who just goes on Twitter to antagonize. And that's marks the difference between a platform like X, Twitter, or something like Letter.wiki. So I would say that Twitter is toxic because it encourages the worst of our behavior, which is commonplace enough, and it amplifies it.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think that's a good place to end it. We're coming up on the hour. Bruce, as always, uh, it's 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 been a pleasure to have this conversation with you. It's absolutely been a privilege. So thank you for having this conversation with me. I hope we have a lot more of these, and it's great. Any closing thoughts?
Not off the top of my head. I'd like to explore the topic of, of free speech sometime, its limits, and the utility of actually having a conversation with people, as
Hmm.
well as how the Enlightenment figures thought, because those are ideas that fascinate me, that dovetail right into what we're discussing, and I that also really explores deep in what they used to call the IEW space,
Hmm.
and with the last year especially has really during COVID has really made me take a second glance at a lot of people I used to follow on the IEW space, because I'm wondering how many of them were true to their principles in terms of empirical bringing empirical evidence to the table to substantiate a belief. How many of them have just gone off the deep end and fallen into a conspiratorial space, and how many of them were dedicated to the ideas of not only free speech and accuracy, but also what we understand to be truth in the first place, and understanding
Hmm.
the fundamental enlightenment and principles behind that is something I'd like to explore.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a great topic of conversation for the next episode. So everyone, get excited for that, I suppose. And also thank you for listening to this episode and hearing us ramble on and on. And we hope to see you in the next episode. As always, Bruce, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope you have a great day today.